It's redraft season, and how do Dynasty GMs manage the news, the short range, and all the hot stove oscillations in market value perception? Because it is coming at us from training camp perspective, and we need to distill it down to the roster moves you need to make. What should you be reacting to, and what is white noise? Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons, joined by Jordan McNamara. And boy, doesn't it feel like sports, Jordan? I mean, I know that not everyone is big into the NBA, but these quadruple headers, they're coming at you. Apparently for like a week and a half or 2 weeks in a row, we're going to be getting 4 games in a row. It feels like college bowl season with the NBA bubble, but also we're 2-3 days into significant, basically daily football information coming at us. Now, what's a tidbit? What's a something that's trying to grab your eye, and what's trying to make notes out of a practice that really there's not a whole lot of takeaways versus tangible. This is going to change, as I think Sigmund Bloom likes to call it, the plate tectonics. What's going to happen in front of us. So I think fleecing those things out, and especially I think redrafting, adjusting what you're going to do in the 4th round versus the 8th round. That is a lot of let's react and let's, all these micro things in August. But for Dynasty, it's a little bit more of a slippery slope on how much you're reacting and to what.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I'll be honest, like the NBA's on, like the NHL, I haven't even gotten into it. I just haven't had, there's been so much content. You're getting like 7 golf majors in like 13 months. You get like the Tour de France. It's the football season. I mean, it's just like drinking from a fire hose right now. It's pretty nice.
You're the only person on any show this week to talk about the Tour de France.
I love the Tour, man. I love it. It's wide open this year. Everyone's getting hurt. So I would say I do think from a dynasty perspective, I think reacting to the news isn't, listening and paying attention to the news is important, but I think it's really important not to overreact to it. And really the key part that I see in it is we overreact to the certainty, right? And so we'll have a position on a player, and then whether it's they come in and do something that we already know that they could do, right? Like the famous quote is, I think it was Jonathan Stewart, maybe. It was someone from the Panthers that was like, man, this McCaffrey guy can really catch. And that was like a headline on, in the news. And it's like, we already knew that, right? Like we knew that he could catch, and now we're just
a picture of AJ Dillon looking like he's chiseled out of steel or stone. You mean that we shouldn't triple count that?
I mean, there was people I know that were really, really counting that. I mean, yeah, it's like we know that he's a good athlete. Like we've known that for a while. And the funny part is when there's sometimes like I don't necessarily blame people, because the narrative on AJ Dillon was not in the circles that you and I thought in, but in other circles, I think was that he's just a plotter, right? He's just a big guy that just runs into people. But we sort of knew how good an athlete he was. So in that case, I actually think it's the market. I mean, AJ Dillon's been underpriced since the minute he was drafted until now. He's still underpriced. And right now the market's catching up on that, which is fine by me, right? The market should get smarter as we go along. The problem I have is that when you get guys like Jonathan Taylor and we're like, oh man, he looks great in pads and he's running through people and all that stuff, like don't double count that, right? Don't double count that. And one thing that I think in my research, in my writing, I talked about base rates, right? So we know sort of what the hit rate on a player is based on how long they've been in the league, what position they play, and what round they were drafted in. So you should really start from there in terms of how you're thinking about players. And then, and whether, for example, like a round 2 running back's 55%, right? They're 55% to produce at least a top 24 seasonal finish in their career. Understand that's the starting point number. And then once you sort of get to being much more confident of that, be cautious but regress it down, right? So if you think, hey, listen, I think there's a 90% shot, you should probably cut that in half, right? Like you should probably go somewhere in between, take the 90% that you think, take the base rate number and cut it in half or something closer to that and use that as your number, right? So that's I think a big part of this is don't express a lot more certainty than historically has been appropriate.
Yeah, and the thing I always come back to, we operate in some of the same parameters of like it's bedrocked in historical stuff,
Mhm.
and then adjust as you go. But what I always find interesting is when I start, as you said, like playing with numbers, where it's like, if you got a round 7 running back, and I always come back, the most recent one I can think of, a Darwin Thompson type, where it's like
Mm.
his natural, like you take in metrics and his draft position and everything, if it's like 9%. And what gets people in trouble is when you start going, well, he landed here, or it looks like the depth chart is kind of optimistic, and all of a sudden you make that. And again, if you don't, a lot of people don't function in the, like the number centric world of this, but in
Mhm.
your head, if all of a sudden now you're thinking it's like 20%, of him
Right.
being the
Right.
chief starter and hitting and,
Right.
being a feature element of the offense for one season or whatever, and you go from 9% to 20%, and all of a sudden he's a guy that you hold on to on the back end of your roster for 18 months because you think it's 20%. Well, now they draft, so what I
Right.
find though is when you artificially lower or raise something like that, or to an extreme. Now, if you go from 9% to 11% because you go, wow, he landed in a good spot, the upside's really there. That's not what I'm talking about. It's like some people literally double stuff, or cut stuff in half because you don't like the guy. And, Van Jefferson, I think, would be a good example of that,
Right.
where it's like, if you don't like Van Jefferson, I drafted him in a couple spots because he fell to such an egregious point. It's like, well, am I going to draft a wide receiver I like from round 5 of the NFL draft,
Right.
or am I going to draft one that I don't like in round 2? That's a pretty easy decision, to be frank.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
But that's so Van Jefferson. If his stock odds are like 28% or whatever it is, like don't artificially make it 14% because that's probably going to kick you in the butt. Like it's not that extreme of you like artificially, superficially not liking somebody. So I think that's a good one, and especially monkeying around with what you think the odds are right now, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
players haven't even got off the ground. I think it's one of the biggest detractors, and maybe redrafters don't care as much, but for Dynasty, it bothers me to my core we're not going to get the preseason because it's all about those guys playing in the second half of games. This might be the only data points you see on them. NFL in pads, live fire game. I'm sorry, 11 on 11 practice is not the same thing. I want to see him against an opponent. And even if it's, threes versus threes, twos versus twos, I don't care. It's going to be really sad that some of these later day 3 guys, undrafted players, they might go to a practice squad and we have their profiles. We have what we thought of them before the NFL. You know what? This actually might help us, Jordan. But it just bothers me that we normally get, I mean, at least, 10, 15, 20 touches, double that for snaps. I mean, you get to see them,
Right.
in the NFL uniform. How do they move compared to, their peers at the position, on defense, etc.? We are just not going to get that this year. And I actually fear, big picture, maybe the days of having 4 preseason games. I mean, they might view this as not as big of a deal of not having it. I'm sure the NFL coaches would prefer it, but just for us dynasty GMs, we're not going to get the reps. We can complain about, it's not real football, all this stuff, but if you just watch the players that you're interested in, then again, that's all we have. And we might go through the whole season and some of these guys are just set to simmer. And then we're going to get to roster cuts and rookie drafts next year and be like, or week 8. And it's like, should I cut this guy? I really like this guy. Haven't seen him at all. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly, like I think it's a function of both things too, right? Like we don't get to see Jonathan Taylor in pads playing, but the other thing that we don't get to see this year, and what's going to be really interesting, is Darrell Henderson was a good example, and I think each year Van Jefferson's probably a similar type of story where you just you just plug your nose, cover up your eyes, and just take the discount, right? Like, but Darrell Henderson's a good example the other way around, which is last year, I mean, in 2 years, right? In the 2 years that since what was it? It would have been the year they went to the Super Bowl, and then last year, the Rams played a collective 0 snaps of their starters on offense. And let's take that a step further. Not even their starters, anyone relevant. And when I mean relevant, I mean running back 1, running back 2, wide receiver 1 through 4,
tight end 1 is running back 1, running back 2.
Right. Tight end 1, tight end 2, quarterback 1, quarterback 2, entire offensive line, right? Who was out there running around? It was Darrell Henderson, right? So that that we're not going to get that situation either. So that was a definitely a negative indicator on Darrell Henderson last year. Now we're into where we're not going to get that information. That's a thing that we're going to lose as well. So again, I do think there's more variance this year in terms of some of the information that we're not going to get. We're not going to be as fully informed, all of those things. That is going to matter a little bit in terms of how we should look at players. But ultimately, kind of like you said, I think we have to take, just takes the numbers and look at them in terms of treating players as profiles and their position in their draft round, and think of them in that range and scope, and that'll help you get through. I actually did that the other way around, and this could be we could do a weekly Clyde Edwards-Helaire feature, but I was actually pretty low on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then I was thinking about, and when I say low, I mean I had him in the early-ish to mid-teens, I think, in a group with the other rookies. And the more I thought about it, I said, you have to really be right to have him that low. What I mean by that is, for a round one running back, right, the odds that they hit are 77% historically. That's been the hit rate in terms of a single top 24 season. For a round two guy, it's 55%, right? So if you put multiple round two guys over him, you really, really have to be dead certain, right? To make that bet multiple times. I can put Jonathan Taylor over him, right? I can do that. But once you start going 2 or 3 or 4 guys over him, I think you're begging for a mistake. That's the other way of doing it, right? And then that might have been a mistake. Looking back in hindsight, we talk about trade journals and decision journals and stuff like that. I think one of the things is we look back, and Christian McCaffrey, we probably had him too low, right? Because we were putting day two guys over him in that draft class. And with his pedigree, that was probably an error that we made. So I have sort of thought about that more and more and moved Edwards-Helaire up. And he's basically the exact, and it was the argument that I used for Josh Jacobs, that I said I have to move Clyde Edwards-Helaire up, because there were people that were putting multiple day two running backs this year ahead of Josh Jacobs. And I said, you just can't do that given what his number is in terms of 80%. He's an 80% future top 24 guy. I mean, you just can't, that's just too much to give away. And that's sort of what brought me back to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I do think it's interesting both ways, right? You can move players up that you're just too low on based on what their base number is. And you can, pick a guy like Van Jefferson in the 4th round just because it's that low. I mean, and this year I can't tell you how many times in rounds 3 and 4 rookie drafts we're taking 2nd round tight ends and Cole Kmet, 2nd round wide receivers in terms of KJ Hamler and Van Jefferson,
or Justin Herbert, at 310 of rookie drafts, or
right. Yeah. And that's when you can get those deals. I mean, and Darrington Evans, Lynn Bowden into the 3rd round. I mean, that's just insane.
It rarely happens, and yet you got 2 to 3 optimal chances like that on day 2 running backs. And we're hearing, that, I mean, Lynn Bowden is playing, he's firmly with the running back group, and that's a variable that, we didn't really have clarity on until they actually get to camp and start putting guys with groups. Because we've seen it with the Senior Bowl. I mean, you're with a position group. This isn't a lot of oh yeah, you're here for 16 minutes and then you're going to go over with the wide receiver. I mean, they don't do that. I mean, you're pretty much with a position group, and so that's good to know. From that standpoint. Do you want to mention this is the Footballguys Dynasty Show, episode 17? Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, and never miss a moment of this show by subscribing at Footballguys DV on YouTube. And I gotta say, Jordan, and this tickled me so much, we've got week 1 projections. Footballguys. Week 1 projections are out. We not IDP yet. It is offensive only, but you can already start making your plans. So these are going to be things that you're going to see those adjustments over the next 3 weeks or so, prepping for, and this helps you for your Dynasty waiver wire. I noticed in a number of my leagues, someone like an Ito Smith has a pretty decent projection, earmarked to be that number 2 guy behind Todd Gurley by the Footballguys projections. And that's something, again, you start seeing a guy on the field. Maybe we saw it with Malcolm Brown, right? He wasn't the starter, but yet he had about 12 touches week 1 last year, couple touchdowns, and you get the running back looking like that. He's going to be an auto pickup. So there's already some week 1 prep you can make because the week 1 projections are out over at Footballguys for those final roster spots. And the draft strategy series of articles, that's a hallmark element of August Footballguys content, and overvalued valued plays and deep sleepers at all the skill positions. It's pretty much full on draft prep, redraft, and also I just want to point out my fantasy league now has a DFS style league that you can actually take part of, where it's kind of a weekly. It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. And if you want to go for high stakes Footballguys Player Championship, drafts are going on daily. You can save $50 by signing up for 3 teams, and there's over 3 million in total prizes. That's myffpc.com/footballguys. And Jordan, we've already had some injuries that are potential week 1 factors here, and it's only been a few days. We're bound to get more. My biggest takeaway is, man, you really got to have the faucet on drip for your waiver wire dollars, because especially ones where it's like you got $100 and the minimum is $1. I mean, you can start going through that, pretty quickly. So I like to use $1 bids for pretty much as long as I can, because I'd rather have 78 $1 bids and a few higher priced ones, because that means I'm getting a lot of cracks. I'm trying to be proactive, but I've seen people spend $5, $10, of that 100, and it's like, are they the quote unquote best guy out there right now? Maybe, but like, what is really like mid-August? You think that's going to be the best use of your waiver dollars? I'm going to say not this year, my friend. There's going to be some carnage to be had, and you still, even if you save, you might not have enough, but at least you have the flexibility to spend more later on. But we've had some soft tissue injuries. It's been more so at wide receiver than running back, a little bit at tight end, and nothing at quarterback so far of note. But anything injury-wise stand out to you, Jordan, in terms of maybe impacting week 1, maybe creating some buy discount opportunities for players, as we've seen, dynasty GMs can give up a little bit on players, and because of the classic slow start.
Yeah, I'll just go, because I'll plug another Footballguys feature is the training camp reports, and we're just digesting news. And I have 3 of them. I cover the Chargers, Rams, and 49ers. And I'll be honest with you, the receiving situation.
You've been busy with the 49ers.
Oh my goodness. The 49ers situation is really, really interesting. And Deebo Samuel, they keep bringing in guys, like bringing Jaron Brown, JJ Nelson. They're running it back with the Cardinals from a couple years ago. They brought in Tevin Austin, a favorite of ours, is this weekly streamer from years ago. And Deebo, this is not good news on Deebo Samuel in terms of his foot. They continue to address that, the depth chart. That is in red lights for me. On top of the fact that Jalen Hurd just blew out his, reportedly, I haven't seen, it looks like they did the test. That's one, just listening to Dr. Gene, that's one you usually get right on the field. You do an MRI, but you don't need an MRI typically, because there's just a field test for it. A hands-on test, I guess. So he's going to probably be out for the year if that MRI is right. Brandon Ayuk is looking really, really interesting.
Like week 1 lineup. Like, yes. Not like he might get 6-7 targets in week 1.
Right. And Shanahan's talking him up in terms of, hey, he's very ready. He's basically a pro already. And there was one thing that has stuck with me for over a year, almost 18 months, about Brandon Ayuk. And it was when N'Keal Harry was being talked up pre-NFL draft last year. There was a quote and a couple of blurbs about Brandon Ayuk actually being better. And he ends up going with higher pedigree, and it's really, that has stuck with me, and it actually turned out to be true. And so that this isn't sort of this come lately in terms of him being a developing guy. This is something that I've just continued to sort of monitor his progress. And again, I'm not going to project a year one mammoth breakout, but I think if you own him right now, and we took just taking discounts on profiles, first round wide receivers in the second round rookie drafts, like you almost have to do that. He's a great example of one that things are going to break right for. One other one that's notable, the holdout rule is different this year. So if guys truly hold out and don't show up to camp, they lose a year of service, which totally sort of kneecaps your ability to actually become a free agent. But what guys are doing is showing up and then not practicing. So Delvin Cook is doing that. Melvin Ingram is also doing that. I think there's a couple of others, but I think that's notable in terms of those situations aren't settled yet. So those are just things I'm looking at. And obviously the Sony Michel thing in New England's big, and Damian Harris is having the rumors are a good camp so far. I mean, it's early, but at least he's, on the field, which wasn't something that happened last year.
Yeah, for circling back to Ayuk, I mean, he went the JUCO route, and ended up being a transfer, and you're always a little bit leery of that transition effect to a major program, but he transitioned well to Arizona State. But also the JUCO route gets you playing. You get games under your belt. He played 45 games in college, and he had over 3,000 yards, 30 touchdowns. And part of that is playing at JUCO, starting out by getting more of a role than if you're sitting, on a logjam depth chart for maybe your first year, maybe your first 2 years. And because frankly, he wasn't a big time recruit. And a lot of times, so he played a lot more his first 2 years, ended up being one of the more attractive transfer guys to upgrade his level of play, and then ended up finishing off his profile being a good athlete as well as producer, and having that thick size, first round pick, and now away we go. But again, I don't think the JUCO and small school factor doesn't bother me, depending on how it goes. If they transfer to a major program and then do nothing, because typically those guys, juniors, seniors, grad transfers, whatever, they should be coming into prominent roles. And if they get completely overwhelmed and buried, that's where I think you have to go back and discount that production at the lower level of saying they're just not on that level. And frankly, the NFL draft pedigree should kind of follow. It'll probably parallel that when they're finishing out their profile. And it sounds like, going back to some injuries, AJ Green, that tweaked hammy, it sounds like it's not going to be an overly big deal. One thing I wanted to read through, Jordan, and I want to see if you're on the same page here, that it sounds like, Chris Carson was away from the team, and now he's pretty much ready to go. I mean, I thought that was more of a question when they bring in Carlos Hyde, and maybe Carlos Hyde was more of a hedge on what they expected from Rashad Penny, who it sounds like he's in good shape. He hasn't ballooned up or anything, but it sounds like pup is more likely than being ready week one, or maybe even not the pup, and just in terms of range of outcomes there. So Rashad Penny is a guy I'm keeping my eye on, because I'm still in on that first round pedigree. And I think we've seen enough positives to say, is he going to get dropped by another team in your dynasty league because week 3 waivers come around? And, he's not going to be in most formats and most IR settings. He's not going to be eligible for that. But if Chris Carson's healthy, how do you feel about Carlos Hyde? Because we're always reassessing with running back depth charts and shuffling in August. Are you still going to be like, let's stash Carlos Hyde into week 1 if we're kind of going through this stretch and Chris Carson is healthy? Or do you say, I'm going to hold Hyde all the way to week 1? If Carson gets all the way there may be a more attractive injury away running back, but it's not a given that I'll keep Hyde until then. But you say, I've got a couple weeks of wiggle room here to kind of see how it goes.
Yeah, I think that part, right? I do think, and if you're going to take a shot on a backup running back, a guy like Carlos Hyde's not bad, because hey, at least what he can do, right? It's not necessarily an issue of defining who he is, where if it's like if Reggie Bonifant became the starter in Carolina because Christian McCaffrey went down, right? We don't necessarily know what he can do. We know what Carlos Hyde can do, and there's goods and there's bads to that, right? There's probably some limited ceiling there, but at least we know that he's capable of playing. But I do think there's a potential for situations to develop, right? So I'm going to be flexible. I mean, he's one, if I had to put like a ranking on injury away running backs, he's probably somewhere in the middle, in terms of, I think we have, as of right now, we have some clarity that it's probably him, but in terms of situation and talent, there's guys that I like better. So I'd probably put him somewhere in like if I was just putting them down somewhere in the mid-teens or so. So I do think that has plenty of value.
Yeah, to give an example of, if you're living day to day on some of this news, I mean, talk about a whiplash. Because I remember the first news coming out of Tennessee camp was Darrington Evans, all these fumbles, ball security issues. Let's go, the next day, literally the next day. Because I remember thinking in my head, like, man, what if they signed Devonta Freeman? What if they bring in a veteran? I mean, this could be not an injury away running back for Darrington Evans right away. That could lead to maybe him being dropped because some people took him in third rounds, which isn't a lock for people to make it through even half a season. So I was thinking of all these kind of long range strategy points to potentially have of where it starts from. But then the next day it's like, oh, he had no issues. So it's like, so that's how much minutia, because we've been in the desert without water, and now all of a sudden they're pouring buckets on our head, just in terms of football being in the news and there's actually stuff going on. That now we're reacting so strongly to it. That was just one example I thought of where it's like you can think oh no, Darrington Evans moving down my rankings, and it's like the next, if you really want to be day-to-day reactive and just super sensitive, where it's like, oh no, this is the start of perpetual ball security issues, and then the next day he's picking up things clean and it's all fine.
Yeah, it's like the guy stuck in the desert who he's given an unlimited supply of water and then drowns, right? That's kind of where we're at.
That scene from Three Amigos. Have you seen Three Amigos where Chevy Chase he's got the canteen, like everyone else like pours it out, like Steve Martin has like almost none. It's like 2 drips. Then you got the other guy, Martin Short. He pours it out. He's got just sand in it. Sand goes all over his face. And then you got like Chevy Chase. He goes like this, and it's full. He's got a full canteen. He's guzzling it, and he's like, he finishes, and he's had so much water, it's like he's almost sick. And then he throws it, and the water's spilling out all over in the cracks in the desert. And then he's got his little lip balm stuff in the lid, and he's going like this. The other guys are just staring at him. He looks over, he's like, lip balm? And they just look like they're about to die because of dehydration. Anyway, back to you, Jordan.
Yeah, that's kind of how we're feeling without with all the sports. I'll say the other thing too is maybe even more so than situational practice reports or Instagram or a tweet or a Twitter video or whatnot. I do think some of the paying more attention to the situations that are getting cleared up. A great example is Cincinnati, where now we know that Rodney Anderson can't pass the physical. There was some question about whether or not Gio Bernard made sense in terms of finances to keep him through the year. I felt pretty confident they were going to keep him for a variety of reasons, but I think that makes it much, much more likely, and I think it really locks him into a number 2 role. So that's another one that I'm looking at situations in terms of maybe not necessarily bumping up huge values based on tweets or whatnot, but thinking about the repercussions to other players in terms of what situations we now have clarity on. And those backup running back situations, that's something that you and I just get giddy over at this point of the year. And I think that's a really, anytime you get that clarity, I think is really, really important at this point of the year.
Yeah. And, Rodney Anderson was that wild card of, he could easily, best case, if he's at his best and he's fully healthy, like he was at times at Oklahoma, he could easily be the primary backup. And, I think even last year we told these stories about how, Joe Mixon, what if he's not around, at the end of his contract, the only guy with prototypical elements there is Rodney Anderson. And you kind of think, but you know what? That we're still not painting that as like a high probability, but when you're talking deeper dynasty rosters and stashing a guy on IR like Rodney Anderson into the offseason for some stretch, seeing how it goes, well, now we got to August, and this may be close to his last chance because of no pedigree, clear durability and recovery watchwords so far for him. So all of those things. I meant to get to this last week. We just kind of ran out of time. So I wanted to make sure we got to this. And again, we're going to have another 2-3 weeks worth of, hey, what's the last 7 days been like now in terms of training camp? And bound to be, because we've only had a few days so far. We're going to get a full 7. So a lot more injuries, a lot more tweaked soft tissue, this and that. which again, Gene Bramall is definitely going to be a resource there. He's updating injury information on Football Guys. Does a great job as the go-to resource there for Football Guys. But this was on I think it was on the forums at Football Guys through one of the Dynasty trade ones, and this is talking about, again, talk about up our alley, so the segue from talking about backup running backs. So some of the highlights here are, it was talking about a Michael Thomas trade. I think it was actually Michael Thomas for DJ Moore and like a late first was kind of the construction of the deal, if memory serves. But the point that they're talking about is the gap between Michael Thomas, and we always talk about points per game and, wins over replacement and things like that, of the true impact of players. And so, Michael Thomas outscoring DJ Moore by, and he just kind of throws out, is it 8 points per game, 10, is it 5? But just, it's really tough to replicate that, that differential between truly one of the small collection of players that move the needle versus sort of everybody else. And you can tier everybody else into, these guys are maybe the next closest, these are more far away. These guys are pretty much replaceable, Jordan Howard types, as we call it, in terms of, they're starters, they're doing things, but they're not really helping your results at all. But one of the big thing that this poster was talking about, a free bagel, just to say who it was, but you can go back and find it, was just how they're looking for points, and we look that off the waiver wire, but then they're not trying to maybe upgrade when they can to a true impact guy, and if you're able to trade DJ Moore plus a collection of other ancillary type things to get a Michael Thomas type, it's like, and we've talked about that before, right? I think we talk about crowning a player or anointing a player before they've done it. We've talked about it at quarterback as well as other positions where you just don't have to take that risk. And so he's talking about wide receiver in this capacity. And this is a good comparison, right? I mean, because DJ Moore is assumed to take a big, massive step. And, he has first round potential and startups and all these great things. But Michael Thomas has kind of been just doing it. So the odds there. So kind of talk about, I mean, you can go in a number of directions in terms of, wins over replacement or just looking at profiles, but talk about how the risk of doing trades like this, where you take the known, and it's not like we're talking about a 35-year-old wide receiver, but taking the known, and now you're taking two chances that in an absolute best case scenario, maybe you replicate what you already have with the known.
I mean, yeah, I think you hit that on the head in terms of known versus unknown. You have a player right now who is on a first ballot Hall of Fame track, right? I mean, that's sort of where we're going with Michael Thomas, assuming health and this continued performance. That's where he's going. DJ Moore is a very good player, and I think we both think highly of him, but that's a different strata, right? I'll say this, the other, there's, I guess, three prongs to that. So that's a trade I think you have to really be careful of doing, right? When you're assuming that someone is going to be that next level, right? That super elite tier, and they have not done it yet. There's a risk there, right? Whereas I think largely Michael Thomas is assuming health. I feel very confident he's going to continue to post elite numbers, and he's shown to some degree that he's quarterback proof already. So we sort of, that's something I'm not necessarily worried about. So that's one part of it. The other part too is, I would say, from a warp perspective, well, let me say this: the assumption that it was 8 points a game and it's going to stay 8 points a game, right? There's an assumption there that you have to, that you have to agree with, and that's going forward, and that's not necessarily always the case, right? So when you see these situations, I think it's true in this situation that there's probably a gap there, and I expect that there to continue to be a gap there in terms of points. So that's the second point. And then the third point is really, what's that worth, right? I mean, what's that worth in terms of...
Well, yeah, I was just to add one thing on that second point you made, which is the gap. Like, so I always like to pose questions on Twitter or to people where it's like, if you got an older guy, because obviously the age difference there is what, about 4 years, I want to say offhand. Right. So, I mean, Michael Thomas, is he age insulated in Dynasty 2 years from now? No, he's going to hit 30 or so. And no, but it's always fascinating to me, the difference, right? I mean, if he only outscored, like, what does the differential have to be? Like, if he outscores DJ Moore by only, let's say, 3 points per game, then, I mean, that trade turns market value wise pretty quickly, right? I mean, the DJ Moore is probably going to be straight up, so you kind of got that first or whatever the ancillary stuff is for free, because, and 3 points, frankly, doesn't move the needle. Now, if Michael Thomas boat races him by 5, 8, 10 this year, then in just one season, because Moore is probably never going to have that season. Likely. Never. So you get that one big magical year that you ride, then that is worth exponential to anything else.
Yeah, and the guys that, right, the more and more we do this, it's the guys that do it at wide receiver just continue to bet on it, right? Because that's who continues to produce, and especially when you're very, very elite. I mean, those guys continue to be very elite. So the other thing too, I would say, is, again, what's it worth factor. The best way to think about this, and really the creation of Warp has been instrumental to me, and I think you would echo this, in terms of helping think about these types of trades and all of decisions. And so the easiest way to think about it is in what I call the rule of 97, which is through weeks 1 through 13, every 97 points that you improve your team over the total in that time period is, in sort of an average size league, it's one quarterback, that'll improve you a win. And then it's about 110 in Superflex. So that tends to be the difference between start one and Superflex. So when you're thinking about trades, you can sort of put it on a spectrum, right? Well, listen, I expect it to be 8 points difference. You sort of extrapolate that out. In the 12 weeks you'd play in the first 13 weeks, that's about 96 points, and that's about a win. Right. So that's really what the value of it is. And people, I think, over and understate those things, right? People, Michael Thomas is going to win me 3 or 4 games. I mean, he's probably won you 1.5 to 2, right? That's probably where he's at. So I think keeping in mind those ranges of outcomes on players in terms of what they're actually worth, it's really, really valuable. And you can make those decisions, those Warp decisions, through rookie picks, through startup picks, through these types of trades, and through selling off players. I mean, the easiest way to benefit off that is selling ancillary guys, where you have 2 or 3 guys that look exactly the same. One of them is more valuable, and you can just sell it off, right? Because you're not losing anything. So that's really the best way, I think, to think about these decisions, is through a Warp context in terms of wins over replacement, how much of a win difference the decision will make.
Yeah, and that's where you can blend that with age and start thinking in terms of, windows of production. If you do start losing market value, again, market value is not the end all be all, but what it does provide you is flexibility. Now you have to know when you're getting into a scenario. So that is, like, right now, if you're buying AJ Green, or if you have AJ Green, you've held him for the last 3 years, or you drafted him in a startup 2 years ago, as one example, you kind of know that the market value is not coming back around. You don't have a lot of liquidity there. The only real chances you'll have to sell him for whatever the most meaningful is would be in season, when he is producing, and to a contender. Like, it's a very specific thing. But someone like a DJ Moore, someone like, just to give younger examples, or DeAndre Swift in week 6. I mean, if he's producing, you'll have a lot more global appeal with those types of players or assets than you will the quote unquote older producer. And then obviously the older player, they stop producing, then it's pretty much zero appeal. They appeal to no one. Maybe you. Maybe they tug at your heartstrings, just for the nuance, of just, I've had them for a while, and just the just that longevity factor for you. I do want to talk about, we have a number of dynasty trades here, and I like to center on this week. Some of the ones I pulled out were the big player. So we've talked about it before, and it kind of talks about the A-Warp and other factors of true impact. So Lamar Jackson in a 1 quarterback format, trading him for 111 this year ended up being Henry Ruggs, different conversation, and a future first. So this Lamar Jackson owner, talk about 2 picks that they were able to make potentially in rookie drafts. They got Patrick Mahomes still, and then they got Lamar Jackson. So that spoke to, they took best player available whenever they got Lamar Jackson. But how do you feel in a start 1 getting 2 firsts for a quarterback that, again, it's sort of a, who are you going to start any given week? And because they've both been massive over the past year specifically.
Yeah, can we just take Henry Ruggs' name out for a second and just talk about it
Sure.
in a general first? Anytime you can get it's really, I have found it's really tough to get a first round rookie pick for a quarterback and start one.
Yep.
That
As it
is
should be, to be fair. I mean, I know some people would argue
true.
that, man, you get a stud and it moves the needle, and yes, they do move the needle, but getting higher level quarterback for second round rookie picks, maybe even third round rookie picks, depending on the age. I mean, what is Tom Brady going to go for? I mean, so just it's pretty easy to find production.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the hidden efficiencies of start one is pay up at quarterback, and it's pretty cheap to do so. And again, from a WARP perspective, they all count the same. So I would say it's like that's a really unique return. I mean, if that's the best you can get, I think you're dealing from a position of strength, and I think you're going to be able to address other positions. Like if that's the best you can get, because the problem, and again, we could say, oh, you should get more. The problem with that is in start one quarterback leagues, there's not a big buyer's market, right? There's not a lot of people out there buying quarterback production, just because if you have Dak Prescott or Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson, or this guy has this particular person had Mahomes, so that's out of the question. But right there's not, like, who's really going to pay up for that, right? I mean, everyone likes
someone weak at the position might have Phillip Rivers and Derek Carr, or just drafted Joe Burrow. I mean, just
right.
Most teams are going to have a couple guys that they feel okay or better about.
Right.
So why would they give 2 firsts for Lamar Jackson? Would be the counter argument.
Yeah, and it's rare. It's just you don't see these, right? It's uncommon to see that. So from a actually extracting value from a position of strength, I don't hate it. Now, if we could talk about Henry Ruggs, it is a different part of that conversation. I wouldn't have gone that route, but in terms of the 2 first, I actually think that's pretty good in terms of what you can get for a starter and a start one.
Oh yeah, and this is also the danger, I would say, of accumulating too many quarterbacks, because if you hit on Mahomes, or I always say when you draft a quarterback in a rookie draft, have a plan, because if if Justin Herbert fell to you at 310 this year, and then he's your third quarterback, if he starts to do positive things, you need to have a plan. Like, you can't sit there in 28-man one quarterback rosters and just sit there with 3 quarterbacks thinking you're optimized, because you're not. Right. So if you've got Dak Prescott, and then let's say, I don't know, then you got Tom Brady, and then your third guy you draft Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow because he's the best player available. Like, have a plan. I mean, if they start to hit, sell them, sell one of the other guys. You got to do something, because otherwise you're just going to fall into this trap, and you're going to wake up one day and have 4 or 5 quarterbacks, and you'll be like, well, there's no market. Well, you made every decision every day to not sell somebody, not try to find a market, or like at these moments where they have a big 4 touchdown game in season, that instead of holding them, sell them, ride your other guys. Or, Justin Herbert's going to get his first start. Like, maybe sell off that. You got him for 310. Maybe you can get trade him and a future third for a future second. I mean, you can find ways to exit and profit without just all of a sudden hurting your roster allocation there.
Yeah, I do deal from, just to close the loop on that, I tend to, I'll collect pedigree fallers. So like Justin Herbert, like you mentioned, I will do that. I think the easiest way to ever extract that value is in a package deal, right? So use, as crazy as this sounds, use Lamar Jackson as a piece to move up the board, right? That's sort of how I would think about it. Or, maybe he's the lesser of example. Use a Joe Burrow who's really vaulting up, right? Use him, package another player and get an elite piece, right? That's sort of, go 3 for 2 or 4 for 2, something like that. That's how I usually extract value from those upgrades in quarterback.
This next one's pretty interesting. It's FFPC Superflex, something we're familiar with. Nick Chubb for Devontae Adams and a first and a third next year. Shallow rosters.
Yeah, my first initial reaction was, I didn't realize that Nick Chubb was going that much more expensively than Devontae Adams. I mean, that's a pretty big cost to pay for 2 players that are going pretty close in valuation.
And the interesting thing for me is, I actually think in terms of like quality years remaining and sort of where they are within their respective peak windows, at their position. I actually think the remaining is pretty similar between the two players.
Yeah.
Even though Adams is older by 2+ years, I believe. But again, Adams's game, I think, ages pretty gracefully. Chubb is, he looks good, but he is firmly mid-peak right here. And kind of, if you were to put it, more on the downside than the upside. So
yeah,
kind of interesting. He came out on the older side.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. When you think about those two guys, that peak could be a 2-win difference over the course of 4 years. You know what I mean? If that's sort of what we're looking at. I mean, that could be a big difference just because elite running backs are going to produce more of a difference than elite wide receivers are. But I agree with the peak window thing. Yeah, I would probably take Adams. That would probably be I think you're sacrificing a ton of value in terms of giving up a first on top of Adams to get Chubb. So I would take the Adams side. And anytime you can get an elite wide receiver in a shallow roster format like FFPC, it's highly valuable because you don't have to roster that many. I mean, it's very valuable in terms of the roster construction as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point is, you can get leaner and meaner at wide receiver, and those first and thirds in the future are just hidden roster spots. You don't have to worry about them until next year's rookie draft. Let's go to Christian McCaffrey, sold, always perk the ears up for Leonard Fournette and DeAndre Hopkins. So again, Fournette's one of our favorite guys right now in terms of the price point. Mm-hmm. Hopkins is right on that, borderline round one startup, depending on who you ask and what's the format. So is that enough for McCaffrey?
I just want to say before I answer that I love DeAndre Hopkins as a player, but this is not enough.
No, it seems like. So what would you add? What would be maybe one thing to add or maybe swap it? I mean, does Fournette really have to switch to, I don't know, Jonathan Taylor or something to even this out? I mean, how high do you have to go? Josh Jacobs? Yeah. So that would basically be what, like 2 top 15 players for number 1 or number 2?
Something like that. Yeah, something, I mean, Taylor somewhere in that range, right? I mean, I have those guys. I have those guys in the top 8 of rankings. I think I have Jacobs at 4 or 5 last check. But I mean, here's the thing: like, this could go very badly, right? And Fournette on a contract year, what does that turn into? I mean, you and I like him.
We like him for this year. We like that he'll probably get future opportunities. But what did we say? Isn't one of the most quizzical things is he had the season he had. He stayed healthy, mammoth season, lots of targets, everything but touchdowns. And yet, yeah, he went down in price. Right. Like the dude cannot do anything right. And that's all you need to know. It's not going up from this point forward. It's Le'Veon Bell, right? I mean, he's not going up. So it's all on Hopkins for this deal, market value wise, and you're betting on a 28-year-old changing teams, and likely the volume's going down. Right. If I had to bet the volume he's used to in Houston, it's going down.
And not to burst anyone's bubble here, but he's going to a worse quarterback situation too. So that I'll just say that as well in terms of there's a lot more uncertainty with Kyler Murray than there is Deshaun Watson. So I think you're taking on a ton of risk, and I this wouldn't be the way I would do it. There's ways to sell McCaffrey. It wouldn't be this.
Get a more insulated top piece.
Correct.
And then add to that, and then add to that, and then explore maybe that deal. All right. All right. So 14 team non-PPR. We got Deshaun Watson, good segue, professional segue by Jordan, for Drew Brees and 105. So it's a 1 quarterback league, and in non-PPR, quarterbacks get a little bit more juice. 14 team, they get a little bit of juice. And Watson is one of those few who have been there, done that, really great track. So you're losing a lot of years. You might be on a 1-year window with Drew Brees, but you're getting one of those top 5 running backs.
Yeah, again, this is a big time price for a quarterback in star 1. So when you get into 14 and 16 team leagues, I do think it's a lot tougher to stream quarterback. It's a lot tougher to do those things. So I do think they come at more of a premium. But give me the Brees side. And that's actually getting better too, that 105, because we're seeing news on Kerryon Johnson's not going well, so it's inflating some of the value of DeAndre Swift. At a worst case scenario, you're going to get him there, or Akers, it's a pretty good value at 105 this year. And honestly, they're not going that much different in terms of startup valuation. So you're basically getting Brees Breeze basically on top. So I would take the pick side on that one.
We've got Cortland Sutton in a half PPR 12 team, Cortland Sutton in a third for DJ Chark and a first. I have one snarky question, but you can answer first.
I want to hear this. Go ahead.
Snarky question is, so you've got 2 day 2 guys that have not really reached wide receiver 1 land of their production, and yet one side has to add a first. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't even like DJ Chark. For the record, I am not on a fan. But you start adding first round picks, I will take his side firmly.
Yeah, it's if you were to sort of paint it, who's got the better odds to be the true number 1 on their team? It's
close.
Got to be DJ Chark, right? Even though we're not huge fans, and we probably like Sutton more as a player, but I would take Chark side.
I have huge questions about Cortland Sutton. I actually wonder if you take the next 2 seasons, is either season better than the season he just had? In terms of, I think he was wide receiver 25-ish. Like, I think he's gonna have a tough time. I think he can be a good player and not replicate that. Last one, 10-teamer. So we are talking about the best player, likely short lineups. We've got Mark Andrews for Ronald Jones and a 21 first. People are just throwing around their future picks, Jordan.
Yeah, someone did ask in the chat room if what we thought of those picks. I'll say I think there's a lot of variance in them. Next year we're gonna see sort of some different hit rates, because there's a lot less information that teams are going to have in terms of all of those decision making processes. But I do think in terms of owning the asset right now, they're having that liquidity and having that bullet to fire if you need it in season to address an injury or a COVID situation or what have you. I do think they're highly valuable at this point. Sort of flipping to it. It's funny, Ronald Jones, we've come full circle on Ronald Jones, right? I mean, we were out at the beginning and now we've been sort of cheerleading him the last 6 months. Finished as running back 25 last year and gets 0 credit for it. I mean, it's basically like him and Leonard Fournette have virtually...
But he's old, right, Jordan? He's
right.
Like 27, 28 now.
Right. Yeah, he's younger than Keyshawn Vaughn, but whatever. At this point, they're essentially guys that their value is totally unrelated to their production, right? I mean, that's sort of where we've gotten with these 2 guys. I'll say in terms of 10-team PPR, though, I'm probably going Andrews, just because I do think that that elite, the elite high level, and you're paying up for an elite player in a tighter league, I would probably take Andrews.
All right. I'm going to go the other side just because 10 teams, I mean, you shrink down the tight ends that are viable there. And the more likely that there's tight ends to be able to get on the trade wire for a lot less than this, and keep your first, trade a second if you really need, quote unquote, need tight end. And I wouldn't honestly, in a 10 team, if you're one of the have nots at tight end, I wouldn't really worry about it. I wouldn't spend a ton of attention, in trading first or doing things of that nature. And I also, wouldn't try to roster 5 of them, trying to quote unquote get it right, because I would guess the waiver wire is relatively fertile. I mean, there's going to be some week 1 starters. I mean, you never know about the lightning in the bottle factor, and half the teams in the league, at least, if not 7 or 8 of the 10, are probably going to have nearly 0 interest in the waiver wire because they got their guy. So you may have a very limited competition as just another strategy angle there. So and the first, hey, it's a top 10 pick. So I mean, you actually do get that. I mean, some people don't, adjust where I'm in an 8-team league, I'm in a 10-team, I'm in a 16-team league. Well, that means you could be 116. It kind of extends what that pick is. So I think that is a couple of little minor adjustments there. And I kind of wonder, Jordan, so what do you kind of think if Ronald Jones finishes in the top 18, this year, do you think that that's a solid win? Even if Mark Andrews is sort of, tight end 3, 4, 5, let's say. I mean, is it more on Ronald Jones on how this trade goes, do you think? Or if Andrews turns into, if he keeps replicating what he's doing, like, is that the winning side of this deal, independent of the other things?
I'll say this. I would think that there's probably a little that happens this year that makes this trade look horrible next year. If you traded, if you took the Andrews side, right? I think this trade could really look bad if you took the Ronald Jones side, right? So in terms of risk, I think there's a lot more risk in that Ronald Jones side. And you're trading into a class that we can like wide receivers as much as we want, but just brass tacks, any rookie class that's shaped around wide receivers isn't a great one. I mean, that's just definitionally, right? I mean, that's just, we just can't put those classes in the elite tier. So I do think in terms of, I think if you take the Andrews side on this, I think your downside is pretty capped. I do think on the other side of it, there's a lot of downside in it, in terms of, and I like Ronald Jones, but there's risk there. I mean, you look at guys that are at his point in terms of entering year 3, round 2 guys, 28% of them hit, right? We can like him and sort of move that number, but you still have to keep in mind that base rate. And there's a lot of different situations incorporated into that. Is his better? Yes, we should move it up. But to just say that he's a guarantee coming into this year, I think that's dangerous. Where I really think that, I really think Mark Andrews is locked into being an elite tight end. I think he's more likely to be, a tight end 1 in 12 months than he is to be significantly fall in value.
Yeah. Look at us disagreeing in a very diplomatic and respectful manner. Look at that.
I disagree.
I disagree with everything you said. All right. Any final thoughts here? There's a lot of stuff, obviously, that we didn't discuss, but we did hit on a lot of points between trading, wins over replacement, as well as some training camp scuttle.
Just buckle up. We're drinking from a fire hose. Don't overreact.
Exactly. What'd you say? Don't drown in the desert. When in doubt, don't drown in the desert, ladies and gentlemen. So again, we discussed Dynasty trading, a lot of different points there about the best player in the deal, and a variety of formats. I'm going to start getting a lot more trades between formats. And again, I can't wait to talk about Dynasty trades in season because things have a way to go awry. Talked about a little bit about Michael Thomas, as well as some of those injuries, moving flex points of not double counting, triple counting, a lot of the things we're hearing out of training camp that, again, we already knew that. so thanks for telling us what we knew, like DeAndre Swift, he's a good receiver. Really, I think 18-year-old Georgia version could have told you that as well, but that's not where we were. So again, I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.